Life has a funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. One minute you're walking across the stage to receive your college diploma, and the next you're stepping into the glossy elevator of a high-rise office building, ready to start your first real job. That was me, Ella, fresh out of law school and eager to prove myself as a lawyer's assistant at Grayson & Associates, one of the biggest trading companies in the city. I smoothed down my newly purchased blazer, trying to calm my nerves as the elevator climbed higher. The ding of the doors opening startled me, and I took a deep breath before stepping out into the bustling office. "You must be Ella," a voice called out. I turned to see a middle-aged woman with a kind smile approaching me. "I'm Margaret, Mr. Grayson's secretary. Let me show you to your desk." As we walked through the maze of cubicles, I couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and intimidation. This was it, my chance to make something of myself, to build the life I'd always dreamed of. Margaret led me to a small but tidy desk near a large corner office. "Mr. Grayson will be in shortly to give you your first assignments. In the meantime, why don't you get settled?" I nodded, setting my bag down and taking in my new surroundings. As I was unpacking my things, a deep voice behind me made me jump. "Ah, you must be our new recruit." I spun around to find myself face to face with a tall, distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit. "Mr. Grayson," I stammered, extending my hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, sir." He shook my hand firmly. "Welcome aboard, Ella. I hope you're ready to hit the ground running. We've got a big case coming up, and I'll need your help preparing the briefs." "Of course, sir," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I'm eager to get started." Mr. Grayson nodded approvingly. "That's what I like to hear. Margaret will give you the files. I expect a preliminary report on my desk by end of day tomorrow." As he strode away, I felt a flutter of panic in my chest. End of day tomorrow? I hadn't even figured out where the bathroom was yet. But I took a deep breath, reminding myself that this was exactly the kind of challenge I'd been preparing for. I spent the rest of the morning familiarizing myself with the case files, barely looking up from my desk. It wasn't until my stomach started growling that I realized it was well past lunchtime. Grabbing my purse, I headed towards the elevator, planning to grab a quick sandwich from the deli across the street. As the doors opened, I nearly collided with someone rushing to get on. "Whoa, sorry about that," a male voice exclaimed. I looked up to find myself staring into the warmest brown eyes I'd ever seen. The man they belonged to was tall and lean, with tousled dark hair and a crooked smile that made my heart skip a beat. "No worries," I managed to reply, stepping into the elevator beside him. "I'm Ella, by the way. I just started in the legal department." His smile widened. "Nice to meet you, Ella. I'm Jake, from purchasing. Welcome to the madhouse." We chatted easily as the elevator descended, and I found myself hoping the ride would last just a little bit longer. There was something about Jake that put me at ease, making me forget my first day jitters. As we stepped out into the lobby, Jake turned to me. "Hey, a bunch of us usually grab lunch at O'Malley's down the block. Want to join? I promise we don't bite." The weeks flew by as I settled into my new routine at Grayson & Associates. The work was challenging, but I thrived on it, pouring myself into each case with determination. And then there was Jake. What had started as casual lunch breaks soon turned into coffee runs, after-work drinks, and eventually, dinner dates. I still remember our first real date. We'd gone to a tiny Italian restaurant, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the city. Jake had sauce on his chin, and I couldn't stop laughing as he tried to wipe it off with his napkin. "What?" he'd asked, grinning. "Do I have something on my face?" I leaned across the table, my heart pounding. "Here, let me," I said softly, reaching out to wipe the sauce away with my thumb. Our eyes met, and suddenly, the bustling restaurant faded away. It was just us, lost in that moment. From that night on, we were inseparable. Jake was everything I'd ever wanted in a partner, kind, funny, and supportive. He'd bring me coffee when I was working late, leave silly notes on my desk to make me smile, and always knew how to cheer me up after a tough day. 1 year after that first elevator encounter, Jake proposed. The wedding planning was a whirlwind. We decided on a small ceremony, just close friends and family. As we discussed our future, the topic of where we'd live came up. "I've been thinking," Jake said one evening as we cuddled on the couch. "Why don't we buy a place together? Start fresh in our own home? I've been saving up." "And didn't you inherit some money from your grandfather?" He was right. My grandfather had left me a substantial sum when he passed away a few years ago. I'd been saving it, unsure of what to do with it. "You're right," I said, excitement building. "We could each contribute half." We spent the next few weeks house hunting, finally settling on a cozy apartment in an up-and-coming neighborhood. It needed some work, but we saw the potential. This would be our home, our fresh start. But I couldn't help but notice the tension whenever Jake's mother, Linda, came to visit. She was polite enough, but there was always an undercurrent of disapproval in her comments. "Oh, Ella," she'd say, eyeing our mismatched furniture. "I'm sure you'll be able to afford better pieces once you've worked a bit longer." Though I always thought Jake would end up with someone more established. I tried not to let her comments get to me, but they stung. Jake would always defend me, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. He loved his mother, and her disapproval clearly bothered him. A year into our marriage, life threw me another curveball. I'd been feeling off for weeks, nauseous, tired, moody. At first, I chalked it up to stress from work and adjusting to married life. But when the symptoms persisted, I finally dragged myself to the doctor. "Mrs. Thompson," the doctor said, looking up from her clipboard. "I have your test results. Congratulations, you're pregnant." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. Pregnant? Us? We'd barely discussed having kids, let alone actually trying for one. But my momentary joy was quickly overshadowed by the doctor's next words. "However, I'm concerned about some of your test results. There's a risk of pregnancy termination if we don't take proper precautions." My world spun. In the span of a few minutes, I'd gone from not knowing I was pregnant to fearing I might lose the baby I didn't even know I wanted. "What do I need to do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Less stress, more rest and relaxation," the doctor advised. "I'd recommend switching to remote work if possible." I nodded numbly, my mind already racing. How would Tom react? Would my boss let me work from home? And most importantly, how could I keep this baby safe? That evening, I broke the news to Tom. His reaction was not what I expected. "Pregnant," he said, his face paling. "Ella, don't you think it's too soon?" We'd barely had time to enjoy being married. I felt a knot forming in my stomach, and it wasn't morning sickness. "Tom, I know it's unexpected, but..." "We should get rid of it," he cut me off, his voice cold. "We're not ready for a kid." His words felt like a slap in the face. Get rid of it? How could he even suggest such a thing? "No," I said firmly, surprising myself with my resolve. "I'm keeping this baby, Tom. With or without your support." The look he gave me was one I'd never seen before, a mixture of anger and disappointment that made my blood run cold. From that moment on, everything changed. Tom became distant, annoyed by my constant fatigue and morning sickness. He complained that I wasn't taking care of him anymore, that I was too focused on the baby. And his mother? Don't even get me started. When she found out, you'd think I'd told her I was carrying the Antichrist. "A baby?" she scoffed. "Ella, dear, you need to be taking care of my son, not bringing another mouth to feed into this world." I tried to ignore their negativity, focusing instead on keeping myself and my baby healthy. I talked to my boss, and he allowed me to work remotely. It was a small relief in the midst of all this chaos. My first day of remote work, I set up my laptop on the dining room table, feeling optimistic. But as I tried to focus on a brief, Jake's voice cut through my concentration. Ella, where's my blue shirt? I can't find it anywhere. I sighed, pushing back from the table. I'll look for it, honey. This became a pattern. Jake seemed to think that because I was home, I should be taking care of everything, cooking, cleaning, laundry. Never mind that I was still working full-time. I thought you'd have dinner ready by now, he'd say, frowning as he came home to find me still typing away at my computer. I'm sorry, I got caught up in work, I'd reply, guilt gnawing at me despite my frustration. To make matters worse, my mother-in-law, Linda, took it upon herself to check up on me regularly. Her visits always left me feeling inadequate and stressed. Ella, dear, she'd say, her voice dripping with fake concern as she ran a finger along a dusty shelf. You're home all day now. Don't you think you could keep things a bit tidier? I tried, I really did. But the smell of cleaning products made me nauseous, and cooking, well, let's just say the toilet and I became well acquainted during those attempts. One day, after a particularly scathing comment from Linda about the state of the apartment, I snapped. If you're so concerned, why don't you help instead of just criticizing? Linda's eyes widened in mock surprise. Oh, sweetie. You're the one who insisted on keeping this baby. These are your problems to deal with, not mine. Her words stung, but I held on to hope. Surely, once the baby arrived, they'd come around. They had to, right? So I focused on taking care of myself, determined to carry this pregnancy to term, despite the lack of support. Meanwhile, Jake's behavior was changing. He started working late more often, claiming the company was pushing for a big contract. Then came the weekend business trips. I wanted to believe him, but doubt was creeping in. Especially when he came home one night, and I caught a whiff of something that made my heightened sense of smell go into overdrive, perfume. And not mine. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. Pregnancy brain, right? But it happened again, and again. Each time, that sickeningly sweet scent clung to him, a silent accusation. It wasn't just the perfume. Jake's whole demeanor towards me had shifted. The man who used to light up when he saw me now barely seemed to notice when I was in the room. Our conversations became stilted, filled with awkward silences. One night, as we lay in bed, miles apart despite the small space between us, I finally gathered the courage to ask, Jake, is everything okay? You seem distant lately. He rolled over, his back to me. I'm fine, Ella. Just tired from work. Good night. As I stared at his back in the darkness, tears silently rolling down my cheeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that my marriage was unraveling before my eyes. The life I thought we were building together was crumbling, and I felt powerless to stop it. Meanwhile, Jack was going on his business trips more and more often I could smell someone else's perfume on his clothes. And then I realized I'd had enough. The suspicion was eating me alive, and I needed to know the truth. With shaking hands, I dialed my Uncle Joe's number. He worked as a private investigator, and if anyone could get to the bottom of this, it was him. Uncle Joe? I need your help, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. 3 agonizing weeks passed. I jumped every time my phone rang, hoping it was Uncle Joe with news. Finally, he called. Ella, we need to meet. I've got something you need to see, he said, his voice grim. We met at a quiet cafe. Uncle Joe slid a manila envelope across the table. I'm sorry, kiddo, he said softly. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. The photos inside confirmed my worst fears. There was Jake, my husband, with his arms around a woman I recognized as the new hire in his department. The timestamp showed it was during one of his business trips. There's more, Uncle Joe said, his eyes full of sympathy. He's not on a business trip right now. He's with her at the Hilton downtown, room 412. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. All the air left my lungs, and for a moment, I thought I might be sick right there in the cafe. I don't remember the drive home. My mind was a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. As I walked into our apartment, clutching the envelope of photos, I was greeted by an unwelcome sight, Linda. "Oh, Ella," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "I came to clean up while Jake's away on his business trip. Lord knows you don't do anything around here." Something in me snapped. "He's not on a business trip," I spat out. "He's with his mistress at the Hilton downtown." Linda's face went through a range of emotions: shock, disbelief, and then, resignation. "Well," she said, her voice cold, "can you blame him? Look at you, always sick, getting fat, never paying attention to him. What did you expect?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you seriously defending him?" She waved her hand dismissively. "This is your fault, Ella. You're the one who insisted on keeping this baby that nobody wants. Jake needs a real woman, not some pregnancy-obsessed, lazy." "Get out," I interrupted, my voice low and dangerous. "Get the hell out of my house right now." Linda looked shocked at my outburst. "How dare you speak to me like that? I'm just telling you the truth. This whole family is against this ridiculous pregnancy. Only you want this baby." Rage coursed through me. I grabbed Linda's arm and practically dragged her to the door. I said, "Get out," I shouted, slamming the door in her face. As her indignant protests faded down the hallway, I slumped against the door, sliding down to the floor. Tears streamed down my face as I cradled my swollen belly. In that moment, something hardened inside me. I stood up, wiping away my tears. I knew what I had to do next, and it wasn't going to be pretty. But Jake and his mistress had no idea what was coming for them. The drive to the Hilton felt surreal. My hands shook on the steering wheel as I navigated through traffic, my mind a whirlwind of anger, hurt, and disbelief. Room 412. The numbers echoed in my head like a twisted mantra. I found myself standing in front of the door, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. From inside, I could hear laughter and the clink of glasses. Then Jake's voice, carefree and happy in a way I hadn't heard in months. "Must be the champagne. Finally." The door swung open, and there stood Jake, his smile faltering as he registered my presence. "Ella, what the hell are you doing here?" he stammered, trying to block my view of the room. I pushed past him, my eyes immediately landing on the woman scrambling to cover herself with a sheet. The new hire. Sarah, I think her name was. Seeing her in the flesh, all long legs and perfect hair, made me want to scream. "Jake, what's going on?" Sarah's voice was high-pitched, panicked. I expected Jake to stammer out excuses, to beg for forgiveness. Instead, his face hardened. "What's going on is that my frigid wife can't leave me alone for 5 minutes," he spat. Each word was like a knife to my heart. I looked at him, this stranger wearing my husband's face, and felt my world crumbling around me. Jake gestured towards Sarah, who was now standing wrapped in a sheet, a smug smile playing on her lips. "This is what a real woman looks like, Ella. Someone who takes care of herself. Someone who puts her man first." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Jake, I'm carrying your child," I whispered, my hand instinctively going to my swollen belly. Sarah laughed, a cruel, tinkling sound. "Oh honey, you should be thanking us. We're being so considerate, waiting until after the brat is born, before Jake leaves you." The room started to spin. A sharp, searing pain ripped through my abdomen, forcing me to double over. "Jake," I gasped, reaching out to him. "Something's wrong. The baby. Please, call an ambulance." I saw a flicker of concern cross Jake's face, quickly replaced by disgust. Before I knew what was happening, I felt hands grabbing me, dragging me towards the door. The last thing I saw was Jake and Sarah, fully dressed now, looking down at me with contempt as I lay crumpled in the hallway. "Don't bother coming home," Jake said coldly, before shutting the door. As darkness closed in around me, my last coherent thought was of my baby. "I'm sorry, little one," I thought. "I'm so sorry." Then, mercifully, everything went black. I came to with someone gently patting my face. A maid, her eyes wide with concern, was kneeling beside me. "Ma'am, can you hear me? I've called an ambulance." The next few hours were a blur of sirens, hospital corridors, and grim-faced doctors. Through it all, one thought kept repeating in my mind, "My baby, my baby, my baby." But it was too late. I'd lost the child I'd fought so hard to protect. Jake never came to the hospital. Neither did Linda. I lay there alone, my body empty, my heart shattered. As the days passed, grief gave way to anger. They had done this, Jake, Linda, that home-wrecking Sarah. They'd killed my baby with their cruelty and selfishness. And they would pay. The day I was discharged, I went home and packed up every last thing of Jake's. Then I drove to Linda's house and dumped it all in her front yard. Linda came rushing out, face red with anger. "What do you think you're doing, you ungrateful little prick?" "Returning your son's things," I said coldly. "Since he's made it clear he doesn't want to be my husband anymore." "Good," Linda spat. "It's about time he left you. You never deserved him. Just sign the divorce papers and get out of that apartment. Jake will be keeping it, of course." I laughed bitterly. "Like hell he will. That's my home too." "Please," Linda sneered. "Jake has the best lawyers in the city. You don't stand a chance. Be smart for once in your life and walk away before you embarrass yourself." As I turned to leave, a thought struck me. I looked back at Linda. "Tell me something. How would you feel if you lost your child because of your husband's selfishness? Because that's what your precious son did to me." For once, Linda had nothing to say. She just stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I didn't wait for her to recover. I had a call to make. "Alex, it's Ella. Remember how you always said you owed me one for helping you pass civil procedure? Well, I need a favor." The court case was brutal. Jake and Sarah tried to paint me as a delusional, jilted wife. They claimed I'd made up the affair, that I was mentally unstable after losing the baby. But they didn't know I had an ace up my sleeve. When Alex presented the photos and video evidence, the color drained from Jake's face. The hotel maid's testimony was the final nail in the coffin. The judge's gavel came down hard. In light of the evidence presented, the court rules in favor of the plaintiff. Mr. Thompson will pay financial compensation for emotional distress and medical expenses. All marital assets will be divided equally. After the dust settled from the divorce, I found myself in a small but cozy apartment, slowly piecing my life back together. The wounds were still fresh, but for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Just as I was starting to find my footing, my phone rang. The name on the screen made my stomach lurch, Linda, my ex-mother-in-law. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Ella?" Linda's voice was small, nothing like her usual imperious tone. "Can we meet, please?" Every instinct told me to refuse, but curiosity got the better of me. We agreed to meet at a neutral coffee shop the next day. When I saw Linda, I barely recognized her. Gone was the perfectly coiffed, judgmental woman I knew. In her place sat a tired, defeated-looking shell of her former self. "Jake and that woman," she began, her voice cracking. "They're trying to sell my house. They want to kick me out on the street." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I was wrong about everything, Ella. About you, about Jake. That woman has poisoned him against me." I listened, my emotions a confusing mix of satisfaction and pity. "There's more," Linda continued. "I overheard them talking about some scheme to cheat the company. I don't know the details, but it sounded serious." As Linda recounted what she'd overheard, a picture began to form in my mind. Jake, working in purchasing. Overpaying for goods. The new employee, his mistress, suddenly involved in big decisions. Over the next few weeks, I pored over company documents, using my legal expertise to uncover a trail of fraud that made my blood boil. Jake and his mistress had been systematically overcharging for goods, pocketing the difference, and were about to push through a major contract for subpar products that would cost the company millions. I knew I had to act fast. With a file full of evidence, I marched into the CEO's office. "Mr. Grayson," I said, my voice steady. "We need to talk." What followed was a whirlwind of internal investigations, legal proceedings, and tense meetings. In the end, justice prevailed. The company won a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against Jake and his mistress. They were both convicted of fraud and would never work in a position of trust again. As for me, Mr. Grayson called me into his office after the dust had settled. "Ella," he said, a rare smile on his face. "Your work on this case was exceptional. We'd like to offer you a promotion to senior legal counsel." I left his office with a new title, a substantial raise, and a sense of vindication I hadn't realized I needed. Weeks later, my phone rang again. It was Linda. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved my home. You saved me from Jake's schemes. I was so wrong about you, Ella. Can you ever forgive me?" I took a deep breath. "I forgive you, Linda," I said, surprised to find I meant it. "But I think it's best if we both move on with our lives separately." As I hung up, I felt the last weight lift from my shoulders. The past was behind me now. Jake, Linda, the betrayal, the loss, it was all part of a chapter that had closed.